The human diplomat had spent years preparing for situations just like this, yet nothing could make him feel truly ready. When the urgent message arrived, he didn't have time to question why he had been called or wonder what the Empire wanted. All he knew was that his presence was required on the central station of the Galactic Empire, a massive orbital complex that seemed to float like a jewel against the darkness of space. It was a place humans had never visited before, at least not officially, and the thought of walking among the beings who had ruled countless star systems made his heart beat a little faster. The transport carrying him was silent, the engines thrumming quietly beneath the cabin floor. Outside the window, the stars streamed past like silver rain, but he barely noticed them. His mind was already racing ahead, thinking of the possible reasons for this sudden summons. Some part of him hoped it was just a routine diplomatic meeting, but deep down, he feared it was something far more serious. Reports had come in that the Empire's fleets had been unusually active near Earth's space lanes, which suggested they had gone further than simple patrols. The diplomat knew that when the Galactic Empire acted, it rarely did so without a purpose, and sometimes that purpose could be devastating. When he arrived at the docking bay, he was met by a silent escort. The aliens who walked beside him were tall and imposing, with eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Their uniforms were ornate, decorated with metallic insignias and ribbons of rank that glittered even in the harsh lighting of the docking area. Despite their intimidating presence, they spoke only when necessary, and their voices carried a calm, formal tone that felt both polite and distant. As they led him through the station, he observed the surroundings carefully. The corridors were vast and clean, lit by soft, white lights that reflected off the polished surfaces. Holographic screens floated above the floors, displaying star maps, fleet movements, and information he could barely begin to comprehend. Other diplomats, presumably from different species, moved with purpose through the hallways, their expressions a mix of curiosity, caution, and something else he couldn't quite identify, fear, perhaps, or uncertainty. Humans were not yet a common presence here, and it was clear the other delegates were aware of that. Finally, he reached the summit chamber. The room was enormous, a circular hall that seemed to stretch into infinity. A large central platform rose from the floor, where the leaders of the Empire waited. Their faces were unreadable, as if they were trained to hide every emotion, but the diplomat could detect the faintest flicker of tension. It was subtle, almost invisible, but he had learned over the years to read even the smallest signs of unease. As he entered, the council of the Empire's leaders rose. A gesture of protocol, he returned with quiet dignity. The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of the station's life systems. The diplomat felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on him, some curious, some skeptical, and some, he suspected, wary of what he might say. "Welcome," one of the leaders said finally, their voice smooth but carrying an edge of authority. "We are grateful you could join us on such short notice." The diplomat nodded. "It is my duty to be here. Please, let us begin." His words were calm, but his mind was alert. Every detail mattered, from the tone of their voices to the way their eyes shifted when certain words were spoken. The briefing began, and almost immediately, the diplomat realized that the Empire was not presenting the situation fully. They spoke carefully, using language meant to minimize any blame, describing their fleet's actions as routine and necessary maneuvers. But the diplomat had access to the intelligence reports, and he knew the truth. The Empire's ships had crossed into human space without permission, a serious violation that could have led to conflict. Yet here they were, trying to frame it as if humans were the ones who had provoked them. He listened patiently, taking note of every word, every hesitation. Diplomacy was never about shouting or confrontation. It was about understanding the situation completely before choosing the right words. And right now, The diplomat needed to understand why the Empire had acted in this way. When the presentation ended, the room fell quiet again. The council looked at him, expecting perhaps a standard response, something polite and non-threatening that would allow them to save face. But the diplomat did not intend to follow the usual scripts. Not this time. This was about something far more important than protocol. It was about truth and accountability, and he had prepared himself for this moment. He rose slowly, letting his presence fill the room. The silence stretched, thick with anticipation, as the leaders of the Empire waited for him to speak. He could feel the subtle shifts in their posture, the tiny movements of their fingers, the way their eyes flicked to one another as if seeking reassurance. The diplomat spoke, his voice steady and clear. "The events near the soul boundary cannot be called routine," he began. "Your fleets entered human space without permission. Your ships crossed our borders, entered our territory, and violated the agreements that have existed for generations." He paused, letting the words settle in the room. "This is not a matter of misunderstanding or accident. This is an invasion. You invaded our world." For a moment, there was stunned silence. The leaders of the Empire did not react immediately, as if trying to process the boldness of the statement. The diplomat watched them carefully. He had expected this reaction. In his years of experience, he had seen similar moments when truth struck harder than any threat could. Then the questions began, sharp and urgent. "How dare you accuse us?" one of the council members demanded, their voice rising slightly, though still controlled. "We were on a reconnaissance mission. We did not provoke any hostilities." The diplomat remained calm. A reconnaissance mission does not enter the territory of another world without permission. Your actions were noticed, and they were recorded. Evidence exists that your fleet crossed into human space and ignored our warnings. You are accountable for those actions. The room shifted uncomfortably. Some of the council members exchanged glances, their composure cracking ever so slightly. The diplomat noted it. Every empire, no matter how vast, had its cracks. Even the Galactic Empire, feared across many systems, was not without its vulnerabilities. He continued, recounting the timeline of events, describing the human response, and explaining the principles that guided their actions. He spoke not with anger, but with clarity, pointing out facts and letting the truth speak for itself. This was diplomacy at its purest form, not manipulation, not coercion, but a presentation of undeniable reality. The diplomat could feel the weight of the moment. He was not just defending his world. He was asserting humanity's place in a universe that often underestimated them. He had trained for these scenarios, but no training could fully prepare someone for the tension of standing before an empire that believed itself untouchable and calmly telling them that their actions were unacceptable. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, one of the leaders, older and more experienced than the others, spoke. Their tone was measured, cautious. "Your words are direct, perhaps too direct. We did not anticipate such a response from humans." The diplomat nodded slightly. "Directness is necessary when truth is involved. Humanity will not ignore violations of our sovereignty, and we will not accept false narratives to excuse aggressive actions. This is not a threat. This is a fact." He could see it then, the first sign of real concern. The council, usually so composed, now showed cracks of doubt. Their eyes, previously sharp and confident, now reflected uncertainty. The diplomat knew this was the turning point. In diplomacy, truth could be more powerful than any weapon, and right now, humanity's truth was undeniable. As the diplomat concluded his statement, he did not bow or offer additional excuses. He stood tall, representing not just himself, but his world. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was not hostile. It was the silence of an empire confronted with reality, and for the first time, they were listening. The diplomat left the chamber later that day, knowing that part one of this confrontation was over. He had planted the seed of awareness, made the empire realize that humanity could not be dismissed, and shown that careful, truthful diplomacy could shake even the most powerful beings in the galaxy. What came next would depend on the Council's response, but the first step had been taken. As he returned to his quarters aboard the station, he reflected on the moment. The galaxy was vast and unpredictable, and yet, even in the face of such uncertainty, one clear voice could change how the strongest empires viewed humanity. He knew that much more work lay ahead, but for now, he allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The human voice had been heard, and it had made them pause, and that pause, he knew, was the beginning of something much larger. The human diplomat awoke the next day with a sense of purpose that had only grown stronger since the summit. Sleep had come in fragments, the mind refusing to quiet itself as it replayed the moments of the previous day. The weight of the empires. Gaze still lingered, their silent reactions and subtle unease replaying like a slow-motion film. He knew that today would be no less critical than yesterday, perhaps even more challenging. He had been briefed to attend a smaller, closed-door meeting with the Empire's senior officials. These meetings were even more intimidating than the summit chamber. Here, the formality was less, but the stakes were higher. Secrets were discussed, strategies planned, and the truths of the universe were rarely polite. The diplomat prepared, carefully reviewing every report and message he had received from Earth, ensuring that no detail could be overlooked. When he arrived at the meeting room, he noticed the difference immediately. The space was smaller, more intimate, but no less impressive. Walls of translucent material glowed softly, giving the impression that the room itself was alive with light. Holographic screens floated in the air, projecting information about fleet, positions, planetary maps, and reports from the farthest reaches of the Empire. The human's eyes could hardly take in all the details, but the diplomat focused on what mattered most: the subtle cues from the leaders. The senior officials were seated around a long, curved table. Their expressions were carefully neutral, but the diplomat could detect undercurrents of worry. One of them tapped a finger nervously against the table. Another's eyes flicked toward the main communications panel, as though expecting to receive urgent updates. It was clear that the previous day's confrontation had unsettled them more than they were willing to admit. "Welcome," one of the officials said, the voice smooth but edged with tension. "We must discuss the recent events near your world. Our fleets report irregularities in your systems." The diplomat nodded politely, choosing his words with care. "Irregularities? Perhaps you mean our response to your unauthorized entry into human space. My reports indicate that your reconnaissance ships crossed our borders without permission. That is not irregular. That is a violation." The room fell silent again, the silence thick with the unspoken challenge. The officials were not used to being called out, especially not by a species they had considered minor players in galactic affairs. The diplomat, however, had learned long ago that silence could be a tool as powerful as any argument. He waited calmly, allowing them to feel the weight of their own missteps. One of the officials finally spoke, a voice quieter but sharper than the rest. "Our intention was not to provoke hostilities. We were gathering information, not attacking. Surely you understand the necessity of reconnaissance in maintaining galactic stability." The diplomat leaned forward slightly, his tone calm but firm. "Reconnaissance does not grant permission to trespass. Stability is maintained through respect, not by entering another world's space uninvited. You are not above the agreements that bind all civilizations. Evidence shows that your fleet ignored warnings and crossed the boundaries. This cannot be justified as routine operations." He could feel the shift in the room. Some officials exchanged Glances, and a few seemed visibly uncomfortable. The human diplomat had expected this reaction. While the empire was vast and powerful, no empire was immune to the force of clear, unarguable truth. He continued, carefully detailing the sequence of events. The initial detection of the Empire's fleet near Earth's outer orbit, the communication, attempts made by human authorities, and the responses or lack thereof from the alien ships. He spoke slowly, ensuring that every point was understood, leaving no room for misinterpretation or excuse. His voice was measured, not aggressive, but firm enough to command attention. The human response was calculated and defensive, he explained. Our fleets did not act recklessly. Every action was documented and communicated. Any future violations will be met with the same vigilance. This is not a threat. This is accountability. The senior officials remained silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of his words. Then, one of them, an older figure whose face showed decades of command, spoke cautiously. Your species responds quickly, perhaps too quickly. We underestimated your capabilities. The diplomat's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in recognition of the truth. Underestimation is a dangerous error. The capacity to respond swiftly is not a measure of aggression. It is a measure of preparedness. Humans value their sovereignty, as all civilizations should. A younger official shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the others before asking, "Do you intend to escalate this matter? Are you threatening the Empire?" The diplomat shook his head slowly. I am not threatening. I am stating facts. If facts are treated as threats, then perhaps the Empire needs to reconsider its approach to diplomacy. Humanity does not seek conflict, but we will not ignore violations of our space. Respect is not optional. It is essential for coexistence. The room remained quiet, but the tension had changed. It was no longer the tense uncertainty of the previous day. Now it was a mixture of concern and calculation. The officials were aware that their actions had consequences, and for the first time, they had to consider a response that did not involve their usual dominance. The diplomat took a moment to let his words settle. He knew that in diplomacy, timing was as important as content. Press too hard, and they could become defensive or even hostile. Press too lightly, and the point could be lost. The balance was delicate, but he had learned to read the room, to understand when silence could speak louder than any argument. Then he presented evidence. Holographic images of fleet movements appeared in the air, showing the path of the empires. Ships as they crossed into human space. Logs of communications, warnings, and responses were displayed. The officials studied the images, their expressions betraying their unease, despite their attempts at neutrality. The proof was undeniable. Your fleet entered our space without authorization. The diplomat stated again, calmly, letting the images reinforce the reality of their actions. This is not an accusation born of anger. This is an observation. A fact. Your own records confirm it. Your leadership must acknowledge the implications of these actions. The older official's eyes flickered to the holographic display, and for the first time, a subtle shift in posture suggested genuine concern. The room had been filled with confidence when the diplomat arrived, but now there was doubt. The Empire, for all its power, was facing the unyielding truth that one determined species would not be ignored. "Do you intend to involve other worlds?" asked another official, the tone softer now, uncertain. "Do you plan to call upon allies?" The diplomat's gaze was steady. Humanity acts in its own defense. Other worlds are not involved unless they choose to be. The point is not escalation. It is recognition of boundaries and respect. The Empire must understand that actions have consequences, even in the vastness of space. A silence followed, but it was different this time. It was not the silence of hesitation or shock. It was the silence of reflection, of realization. The officials were beginning to grasp that the humans they had considered minor and manageable were anything but. Finally, the older official spoke again, slower this time, more carefully. Your words are firm. Perhaps we have underestimated the extent of human response and their determination. Your species does not follow the path we expected. The diplomat nodded slightly, letting the weight of his points sink in. Humans value truth and fairness. That does not make us weak. It makes us vigilant. You have the choice to acknowledge this truth or ignore it at your peril. Diplomacy requires honesty. I am here to ensure that honesty is not forgotten. The discussion continued for hours, each point examined, each argument countered with calm clarity. The diplomat did not raise. His voice did not threaten, did not need to. The facts themselves were powerful enough to shift the room. By the end of the meeting, the officials were no longer defensive. They were cautious, wary, and thoughtful. For the first time, the Empire's leadership was forced to recognize humanity as a serious presence in the galaxy. When the meeting concluded, the diplomat returned to his quarters. He was exhausted, yet satisfied. Part 2 of this confrontation had been completed. The Empire had seen the human response up close, had faced the reality of their actions, and had been unable to dismiss the truth. He knew the journey ahead was far from over, but he also knew that the foundation had been laid. Humanity had spoken clearly and firmly. The Empire had listened, even if reluctantly. And in that listening, in that quiet acknowledgement of reality, the diplomat could see the first signs of change dot as he looked out into the vastness of space once more. The stars no longer seemed distant and cold. They seemed alive with possibility. The galaxy was watching, and humanity was making its presence. No, not through conquest or fear, but through courage, clarity, and an unwavering commitment to truth. The human diplomat woke early, before the artificial lights of the Galactic Empire station fully brightened the corridors. Sleep had come fitfully, a restless chain of half-formed thoughts and anticipations. The previous meetings had been intense, testing his patience and his skill, but they had also been revealing. He knew the Empire was unsettled, their confidence shaken, yet he also understood that this was only the beginning. The hardest part of diplomacy was never speaking the truth. It was ensuring it was heard and acted upon as he walked through the quiet corridors toward the communications center. He observed the daily rhythm of the station. Aliens of different species moved with purposeful precision, their movements fluid and efficient. Yet there was an undercurrent of tension in the air. He could sense it even from a distance, the hushed conversations, the sharp glances exchanged, the way some paused, mid-step when noticing him. The Empire was a vast network of power and protocol, but even here, they were aware of humanity in a new way. The diplomat entered the communications chamber, a large space filled with holographic displays and projection tables. This was the nerve, center of the station, where data flowed from the furthest colonies, where fleet movements were tracked, and where every word of communication was recorded. He was here to review intercepted reports from the fleets near Earth space, and to prepare for the next session with the Empire's leaders. Minutes turned into hours as he sifted through the information. Each log, each message, each transmission painted a clearer picture of what had occurred. The Empire had not simply crossed the borders, they had done so with confidence, assuming humanity would either ignore it or be too weak to respond. They had underestimated the humans' vigilance, their ability to act decisively, and their willingness to stand firm. Every piece of evidence reinforced the same lesson. The Empire had made a mistake, and they were now forced to acknowledge it. When he was called back to the summit chamber, the diplomat noticed subtle changes in the atmosphere. The council had gathered once more, but this time there was an unfamiliar tension in their posture. They spoke in quieter tones, often pausing as if measuring their words carefully. The diplomat could see the hesitation, the uncertainty in their eyes. It was not arrogance that had been replaced, but caution, the first sign of recognition that humans could not be ignored. The session began with the council discussing their fleet's recent movements. They attempted to reframe the situation, suggesting that the human response had been disproportionate, that the Empire had acted responsibly and only in self-defense. The diplomat listened carefully, aware that this was a strategy, a test to see how far he would push. He knew that diplomacy was often a game of patience, a balance of assertion and observation. Finally, he spoke. His voice was calm, steady, deliberate. "The facts remain unchanged," he said. "Your fleet entered human space without authorization. Your ships ignored warnings. These actions were not defensive. They were violations of agreements that have been in place for generations. This is not about perception. It is about reality." The room shifted as his words sank in. Some of the officials exchanged quick glances, their composed facades faltering. For just a moment, the diplomat noticed the subtle changes, the tightening of a jaw, the shift of weight from one foot to another, the careful avoidance of eye contact with certain colleagues. Even the Empire, with all its experience and authority, could not fully hide its unease when confronted with the undeniable truth. "Your species reacts quickly," said one of the council members, almost reluctantly. "Perhaps too quickly. We had assumed that diplomacy would follow the traditional pace." The diplomat tilted his head slightly, acknowledging the comment without breaking his focus. "Humanity's actions are measured and deliberate, not rash. We respond based on principle, not impulse. Respect for sovereignty is not a matter of speed, it is a matter of recognition. Any species that ignores that principle risks consequences." He continued, carefully reviewing the chain of events with the council. Every warning message, every fleet maneuver, every human response was presented clearly and methodically. His goal was not to intimidate, but to illuminate, to make it impossible for them to continue dismissing the facts. Diplomacy was a subtle art, and he knew that sometimes the quiet presentation of truth could achieve more than anger or threats ever could. One of the younger officials hesitated before asking, "Are you implying that we acted recklessly?" The diplomat's gaze was unwavering. "I am stating facts. The actions of your fleet violated established boundaries. Recklessness is not an accusation, it is the description of reality. You may interpret it differently, but the evidence is clear. This is not a judgment. It is an observation of outcomes." As he spoke, he could see the council grappling with their own perception of events. Some seemed defensive, while others quietly began to understand the gravity of their mistake. Diplomacy often involved this dance presenting truth, while allowing others the space to accept it. The diplomat was skilled at reading those unspoken cues, and he could sense the moment when the balance began to shift. "Perhaps we underestimated humanity's willingness to act decisively," said the older official. "Finally, we believed your species would negotiate quietly, without confrontation. It seems we miscalculated." The diplomat nodded, his expression calm but firm. "Misjudgment is common when a species is underestimated. Humanity values its independence and its principles. We will not allow violations of our space to go unchallenged. This is not hostility. This is expectation. Respect is not optional." He paused, letting his words sink in. The council members, usually so confident, now showed signs of reflection and concern. They were beginning to realize that humanity's approach was unlike anything they had anticipated. It was not aggressive, yet it was unyielding. It demanded recognition, not fear. Then the discussion shifted. The council asked questions about humanity's capabilities, their fleet coordination, and their readiness to respond to further intrusions. The diplomat answered each question carefully, providing enough information to demonstrate competence, but never revealing strategic vulnerabilities. He spoke honestly, without exaggeration or threat, allowing the council to see the strength of humanity in clear, undeniable terms. The humans acted within established protocols, he explained. Our responses were measured, our actions justified. We are not a species to be underestimated, and we are not a species to provoke lightly. The consequences of ignoring this reality are yours to consider. For hours, the council deliberated, their voices hushed, their tones cautious. A diplomat remained present, listening carefully, providing clarification when needed, but never raising his voice. His calm persistence was a silent reminder that humanity did not rely on intimidation or aggression to assert itself. Their power lay in preparation, clarity, and principle. As the session drew to a close, the diplomat could sense a subtle change in the council's demeanor. They were no longer dismissive. They were cautious, aware, and perhaps a little wary. The empire had faced the reality of human capability and determination, and it had left an impression that would not be easily forgotten. Walking back to his quarters, the diplomat reflected on the day. Part 3 had been about more than just confrontation. It had been about establishing understanding. He had not sought to humiliate or provoke, but to ensure that the truth was acknowledged and respected. The empire had been forced to see humanity in a new light, not as a minor power, but as a presence worthy of attention and caution. The corridor outside his quarters was quiet. Stars twinkled through the massive observation windows, and he paused to look at them. Humanity had taken the first steps toward recognition in a galaxy that often assumed it could act without consequence. Today, those steps had been deliberate, careful, and resolute, and yet he knew the challenges ahead were far from over. Diplomacy was never a single act. It was a series of actions, each building upon the last. Part 3 had established understanding, but the next parts would require strategy, patience, and continued clarity. The empire had been shown the truth, but whether they would act upon it remained to be seen. The diplomat allowed himself a quiet moment of satisfaction. He had maintained composure under pressure, presented the facts without aggression, and begun to change the perception of humanity. The galaxy was vast, the empire powerful, but the human voice had been heard, and that voice had made them pause. He turned away from the observation window, ready to face the coming challenges. Part 3 was complete, and the story of this diplomatic confrontation was unfolding in a way that demanded attention, respect, and careful thought. Humanity was no longer unseen, and the empire had been reminded that even the smallest voice could command attention when backed by truth, principle, and courage. The human diplomat knew the empire was unsettled, but he also understood that unsettled leaders often tried to regain control by pushing conversations in directions that could be dangerous. Today, his role was not just to present facts, but to guide the discussion, to ensure that the truth about the border violations was understood and could not be twisted. He walked through the station's corridors with steady determination, his mind focused, observing everything around him. Every movement of the alien staff, every glance exchanged in the hallways, told him something about their current state of mind. There was tension, yes, but also curiosity, and even a hint of respect. When he entered the council chamber again, he noticed an immediate change. The senior officials were more subdued than before. Their previous arrogance had shifted into a quieter, more cautious demeanor. Some of them whispered to each other before speaking, and one or two seemed to linger near the edges of the room, hesitant to engage directly. The diplomat knew this behavior well. It was the first sign that his words from previous sessions had made an impact. The empire was aware that they could not dismiss humans so easily anymore. The session began with one of the council members addressing him directly. Your presence here is unusual, they said carefully. It seems. Your species has responded with unexpected decisiveness. Tell us why you continue to insist on these claims. The diplomat looked steadily at the council. He could feel their scrutiny, their attempt to catch him off guard, but he remained calm. I insist on these claims because they are facts. Your fleet entered human space without permission. Your ships ignored warnings. These are not interpretations. They are recorded events. Humanity acts with principle and clarity, and our insistence is not aggression, it is accountability. For a moment, the council fell silent. Then, a younger official, one who had spoken less in previous sessions, leaned forward, eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and unease. Do you intend to escalate this situation? Do you believe humanity is capable of greater action? The diplomat's gaze was unwavering. We do not seek escalation. We seek recognition. Humanity is prepared to defend its sovereignty. The capability exists not as a threat, but as a deterrent. The point is clear. Actions have consequences. That is all any civilization should need to know. The room shifted subtly. The council members were no longer simply listening. They were thinking, weighing, and reassessing. The diplomat could see it in the small details. The furrow of a brow, the tap of a finger against the table, the way eyes darted to communications panels as if seeking reassurance. His words were not causing panic, but they were forcing them to acknowledge something they had not anticipated, that humans were deliberate, vigilant, and capable of responding decisively. Perhaps your species is too cautious, another official said, attempting to regain control of the discussion. You rely on records and rules rather than instincts. We act based on experience and strategy. The diplomat leaned slightly forward, his tone calm but firm. Caution is not weakness. Rules and principles exist to prevent errors and ensure fairness. Strategy without respect for other sovereignty is reckless. Experience without accountability is dangerous. The actions of your fleet near Earth demonstrate both. The council's reaction was subtle but telling. A few members shifted uneasily in their seats, exchanging looks that betrayed their concern. The Empire, which had grown accustomed to projecting power without challenge, was now forced to confront a species that combined careful planning with unwavering principle. Humans were not aggressive for the sake of dominance. They were prepared to act when necessary, and they insisted that their actions be acknowledged. The diplomat continued, presenting the detailed evidence once more, but this time he focused on the human perspective. He spoke of the lives at stake, the careful coordination required to respond without provoking unnecessary conflict, and the discipline of their fleet. He made it clear that humans acted not out of fear, not out of anger, but out of responsibility. His calm explanation highlighted a contrast that the council could not ignore. The humans measured principled response versus the Empire's assumption of unchecked authority. This is not a matter of superiority or weakness, he explained. It is a matter of responsibility and accountability. Humans respect the lives of their people and the agreements that maintain order. Your fleets violated that order, and you must recognize the consequences of those actions. The council members remained quiet, but the tension had deepened. This session was no longer about debating interpretations. It was about facing an undeniable reality. The diplomat's words carried weight because they were grounded in evidence and principle. He did not threaten, he did not boast, but his message was clear. The Empire had made a mistake, and they could not ignore it. One of the older officials finally spoke, their voice low, almost reflective. Perhaps we misjudged humanity's ability to respond with precision. Your actions were deliberate, calculated, and yet not aggressive. It is unusual. The diplomat nodded, recognizing the significance of the admission. Deliberation is not weakness. Humanity values clarity, accountability, and truth. These are strengths, not liabilities. You are witnessing a species that acts thoughtfully, yet decisively. That is the difference between respect and disregard. He could see the subtle tension in the council grow. They were beginning to understand that humans were not like other species they had dealt with. Humans were unpredictable in the sense that they could not be intimidated by size, numbers, or assumed superiority. They acted based on principle and evidence. And when confronted with truth, they demanded acknowledgement, not apology. "Do you expect us to apologize?" asked a younger official, the words carefully measured, almost hesitant. The diplomat shook his head. "Apology is not the point. Recognition is. Understanding the violation, acknowledging it, and adjusting behavior accordingly is what diplomacy requires. You do not need to feel shame. You need to understand consequence. That is what humans expect, and what any civilization should expect. When boundaries are crossed." The council remained quiet, the conversation turning inward. The senior officials whispered to one another, their tone low and cautious. For the first time, the human diplomat observed a fracture forming not of disunity, but of uncertainty. The empire had long relied on authority and control, but now they faced the reality of a species that demanded fairness, principle, and accountability. As the hours passed, the session shifted from accusation and defense to discussion and reflection. The council began to ask questions, not to challenge, but to understand. They wanted to know more about the humans' readiness, their decision-making process, and how they coordinated such a response. The diplomat answered carefully, providing insight without revealing strategic vulnerabilities. He emphasized preparation, discipline, and principle, allowing the council to see humanity's strength without perceiving it as a direct threat. By the end of the day, the atmosphere in the chamber had changed completely. What had begun as tension and challenge had evolved into cautious acknowledgement. The empire's leaders were no longer defensive. They were contemplative. The human diplomat had guided them toward understanding, not through confrontation, but through clarity, evidence, and the unyielding presentation of principle. As he left the chamber, the diplomat reflected on the day's progress. Part 4 had been crucial. The empire had been forced to confront the reality of human action, and the subtle shift in their behavior suggested that his message was being absorbed. Diplomacy was rarely immediate. Its effects unfolded gradually. But today, the seeds of recognition had been planted. Walking through the corridors, he noticed the station's activity in a new light. The aliens moved with efficiency, yet he could sense unease in the undercurrents of their behavior. His presence, the clarity of his statements, and the undeniable facts of human readiness had begun to change perceptions. Humanity was no longer an abstract concept. It was a tangible force to be considered. The diplomat paused at an observation window, looking out at the endless stars. The galaxy was vast, and the empire was powerful, but the human voice had made an impact. Through calm, evidence-based communication, he had achieved what few could. He had forced the empire to pause, reflect, and recognize humanity. Part 4 was complete, but the journey was far from over. Challenges remained, decisions were pending, and the full implications of the confrontation were yet to be seen. But the human diplomat knew this. Truth, principle, and clarity were powerful tools, and he had used them to shift the balance of perception. As he returned to his quarters, he allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. The empire had been forced to confront facts they had hoped to ignore. The human response was no longer theoretical. It was undeniable, deliberate, and respected. The stars outside the station twinkled silently, as if bearing witness to the growing presence of humanity in the galactic order. Tomorrow would bring new discussions, new challenges, and new opportunities to reinforce the message. But for now, the human diplomat understood that Part 4 had achieved something important. The Empire had begun to realize that the humans could not be dismissed. Recognition had been earned, not through force, but through courage, clarity, and unshakable principle. And that recognition, he knew, would shape. The diplomat woke to another day aboard the vast galactic Empire station, his mind already active with plans and observations. The past sessions had been intense, testing patience, composure, and understanding of the complex layers of alien diplomacy. Yet each moment of tension had also revealed something important. The Empire was listening, even if reluctantly. Today, he knew, was about ensuring that the broader consequences of their actions began to ripple beyond the walls of the council chambers. He moved through the corridors with deliberate calm, observing the subtle shifts in the station's atmosphere. The Empire's officials were quieter than before, their movements careful, as if aware of the human presence in a way they had not been before. Whispers seemed to follow him down certain hallways, conversations pausing as he passed. The diplomat knew this was a good sign. Fear was not the goal, but respect and attention were. Humanity was making its presence felt not through power alone, but through clarity and unshakable principle. The day's first session was called not by the council itself, but by senior fleet commanders who had observed the events near Earth firsthand. Their reports, previously filtered through layers of bureaucratic interpretation, were now being presented directly. The diplomat listened carefully, noting both what was said and what was left unsaid. The commanders were careful, almost defensive in tone, but there was an undercurrent of concern that had not been present before. Your fleets were precise in response. One of the commanders said, speaking slowly as if choosing words with extreme caution. We did not anticipate such coordination. We did not anticipate such efficiency. It seems our assumptions about your species were inaccurate. The diplomat nodded calmly, acknowledging the observation without comment. Humanity's efficiency and discipline were strengths, but they were not bragging points. His goal was not to intimidate, but to demonstrate that humans were a species that acted with awareness and principle. Humanity prepares. We respond deliberately, not impulsively. Miscalculations of capacity lead to mistakes, and today you are witnessing the results of such miscalculations. The commanders shifted uneasily. The diplomat could see it in the way they avoided eye contact, the slight hesitation in their tone, the careful attention to every word. The Empire had always assumed superiority, relying on its fleets and technology to enforce authority. Now, confronted with an unexpected species that acted decisively without aggression, they were forced to reconsider their assumptions. What do you expect from us? Another commander asked cautiously. Should we adjust our fleets? Change our patrols? Alter our approach? The diplomat's tone was measured. Adjustment is not optional. Recognition of human sovereignty and boundaries is required. Your fleets should understand that humanity's space is not open for unauthorized entry. The principle is simple. Respect is not negotiable. The consequences are not threats. They are simply the result of ignoring reality. He presented further evidence, this time highlighting not only the movements of the Empire's ships, but also the care with which humans had avoided unnecessary escalation. Logs showed that the humans had acted defensively, but always with precision and restraint. Every move was recorded, every communication documented. The proof was methodical, undeniable, and designed to leave no room for misinterpretation. Commanders listened, some frowning, some exchanging worried glances. For the first time, the diplomat saw hesitation replacing confidence. The Empire had faced a species it had assumed was manageable, and that assumption was no longer valid. The human presence had disrupted the established narrative of authority, and the ripple effects were only beginning. Your actions? "Were unexpected," said a senior commander, the tone softer now, almost reflective. "We assumed humans would follow established patterns of negotiation. Your response has challenged that assumption." The diplomat's voice remained calm. "Humanity acts based on principle, not expectation. Your assumptions do not define us. Your fleets crossed our borders without permission, and the actions that followed were defensive and deliberate. That is not unexpected, it is consistent with our values. The point is that actions have consequences, and understanding them is essential." The session stretched on for hours. The diplomat answered every question, clarified every misunderstanding, and presented the evidence in a way that was clear, factual, and impossible to dismiss. He did not raise his voice, did not issue threats, and did not allow frustration to creep into his tone. His presence alone, combined with methodical presentation and calm authority, was enough to shift the room. By midday, whispers had started spreading beyond the chamber. Fleet officers shared what they had learned, discussing the human's capabilities and the diplomat's clarity. Rumors of the precision, discipline, and measured decisiveness of humanity's actions began to circulate quietly among the station's inhabitants. For the first time, the Empire's reputation for unchallenged authority was being questioned. Internally, some spoke in admiration, others in concern, but all acknowledged that the humans were not to be dismissed. Later, the diplomat was invited to a separate, informal discussion with representatives from several member species of the Empire. These species had observed the events and were now beginning to question their own assumptions. The diplomat listened carefully as they expressed a mix of curiosity and caution. "Your species responds in ways we did not anticipate," one representative said. "We have lived under the Empire's protection for generations. Humans challenge expectations." The diplomat smiled faintly. "It is not challenge for the sake of confrontation. It is clarity and principle. Humans value truth, fairness, and responsibility. When those are violated, we respond accordingly. That is all you need to understand." He spoke at length, emphasizing the difference between aggression and accountability. He explained that humanity's actions were deliberate, structured, and guided by principle, not impulsive or emotional. The representatives listened intently, nodding, some taking notes, others simply observing. They were beginning to understand that humans were not a species to be underestimated, and that their response was not based on fear or arrogance, but on preparation and principle. "Do you intend to expand this approach to other encounters?" Another asked, curiosity clear in their voice. The diplomat's gaze was calm, yet unwavering. "Humanity acts based on principle. Wherever our sovereignty is challenged, wherever agreements are ignored, our response will be consistent. This is not about expansion. It is about recognition. Every species should understand that boundaries are not optional and that accountability is universal." The discussion lasted well into the afternoon. By the end, the diplomat could see that he had not only reinforced humanity's position with the Empire, but had also planted seeds of understanding across multiple species. They were beginning to see humans as deliberate, principled, and prepared, a species that acted not out of fear, but out of responsibility. As the day drew to a close, the diplomat returned to his quarters. The station was quieter now, the hum of life and activity continuing, but there was a sense of subtle change in the air. The Empire's fleets were moving more cautiously, their officers more aware of the humans' presence. Rumors and discussions were circulating quietly among officials, fleet commanders, and representatives. Humanity's actions and the diplomats' careful, clear communication were creating a ripple effect that could not be ignored. He paused at the observation window, looking out at the vastness of space. Stars stretched endlessly, but he no longer saw them as distant points of light. They were symbols of the galaxy's complexity, of the many species and civilizations that humanity now needed to navigate carefully. Today, the Diplomat reflected. Part 5 had been about influence and perception. The facts had been presented, principles reinforced, and the ripple of understanding had begun. Tomorrow would bring new discussions, perhaps new challenges, but for now, he allowed himself a quiet moment of satisfaction. Humanity had been heard. The Empire had been forced to reflect. Other species had been given insight. The human voice, calm and deliberate, had begun to change the way the galaxy viewed Earth. Part 5 was complete. The stage had been set for the final outcomes. The ripple of recognition was spreading, and the Diplomat knew that the Empire, for all its power and tradition, could no longer ignore the presence of a species that acted with clarity, principle, and undeniable capability. And with that realization, the Diplomat turned away from the stars, ready for whatever challenges the next session would bring, confident that humanity had begun to secure its place in the galaxy, not through aggression, but through courage, truth, and unwavering accountability. The human Diplomat awoke to a quiet station, the soft hum of machinery and distant voices drifting through the corridors. The past days had been long and challenging, filled with tense meetings, careful negotiations, and endless observation of the Empire's subtle reactions. Today, he knew, would be pivotal. It was not just about presenting facts or enforcing accountability. It was about shaping understanding, ensuring that the recognition of humanity's rights and sovereignty would endure beyond the walls of the council chambers. He walked to the summit chamber with measured steps, feeling a calm confidence in the knowledge that the previous sessions had prepared him well. The Empire was watching him closely, yet he sensed something had shifted. The initial arrogance and unquestioned authority of the council had given way to careful consideration and a hesitant respect. Every glance, every gesture, every word exchanged among the council members hinted at their awareness that humans were no longer a species to be dismissed. The session began with an unusual tone. The leaders did not launch immediately into protocol or procedure. Instead, there was a quiet discussion among themselves before one of them addressed the Diplomat. "We have reviewed the reports, and we have considered the evidence you have presented. Your species has acted decisively and clearly. It is remarkable." The Diplomat remained calm, his expression steady. Humanity acts based on principle, not on desire for recognition. The actions you observed were measured, deliberate, and in accordance with our commitment to protect our world. This is not an assertion of superiority, but an insistence on accountability. The room fell silent. For a moment, it was the first time that acknowledgement had been spoken aloud, not whispered behind screens or in private conversation. The weight of his words was felt by everyone present. The council had been forced to face the undeniable truth that humans acted with discipline, intelligence, and careful foresight. A younger council member spoke cautiously. "Do you intend to forgive the Empire for these intrusions, or will there be further actions?" The Diplomat's gaze was calm but firm. Forgiveness is not the matter at hand. Recognition of boundaries is. The Empire's actions violated human space. That is a fact. Acknowledgement of this fact and understanding the consequences is the foundation for peace. Humanity does not seek retaliation unnecessarily, but we will not ignore violations. That is principle, not threat. The senior officials exchanged looks. Some whispered. Quietly, others simply sat in silence. The Diplomat observed carefully, noting the subtle shift in their body language. The tension had not disappeared, but it had transformed into something more considered a cautious respect, an understanding that humans acted with clarity and could not be dismissed lightly. Then he presented the final piece of evidence, a detailed log of communications, warnings, and fleet movements during the incident. Holographic images showed every path taken by both human and Empire ships, highlighting the restraint and precision of the human response. The logs emphasized the disciplined coordination, the avoidance of unnecessary escalation, and the careful observance of protocol. This evidence, he explained, demonstrates the principle behind human action. We act decisively, yet carefully. We enforce our sovereignty, yet avoid unnecessary conflict. This is not aggression, it is responsibility. The Empire's actions near Earth tested those principles, and they were upheld. The room was quiet again, but the silence was different this time. It was no longer the uncertainty or tension of the previous sessions. Now it was the weight of understanding, the awareness that humans had acted with authority, intelligence, and unwavering principle. The diplomat could feel it in the way the officials shifted in their seats, the careful attention they gave to every word, the slight nods that acknowledged comprehension without openly admitting vulnerability. One of the older council members spoke slowly, almost hesitantly. Your species has demonstrated qualities we did not anticipate. We assumed humans would negotiate cautiously, follow protocol quietly, and avoid confrontation. It seems our assumptions were inaccurate. The diplomat nodded, his voice steady. Assumptions are never a substitute for facts. Humanity acts based on principle, evidence, and responsibility. We do not seek to challenge unnecessarily, but we will enforce our sovereignty when it is violated. That is the reality the Empire must accept. The discussion shifted, this time focusing on future protocols. The Council asked how human space could be respected in the future, what precautions could prevent accidental violations, and how communication could be improved to avoid misunderstandings. The diplomat answered each question with clarity and calm authority, reinforcing the message that respect and recognition were not optional, they were essential. Hours passed. The council members, once brimming with confidence, were now careful and measured. They listened, not to argue, but to understand. They asked questions not to challenge, but to clarify. And through it all, the diplomat remained calm, composed, and unyielding in his commitment to principle and truth. At one point, a representative from a distant member world asked, "Do you believe humanity will act the same in every situation? Are these principles universal?" The diplomat looked steadily at them. Principle is universal. Humanity responds according to principle, not impulse. Respect for boundaries, recognition of sovereignty, and accountability for actions are not optional anywhere. These are the foundations for coexistence. Every civilization should understand this, as should the Empire. The representatives nodded, some in quiet agreement, others in reflection. The ripple of understanding was spreading beyond the immediate council. The diplomat could sense it, the beginnings of a broader awareness that humans were deliberate, principled, and capable. They were not aggressive for dominance. They were careful, capable, and resolute. As the session drew to a close, the diplomat summarized his position, calmly and clearly. The Empire has been reminded that humanity cannot be ignored. Our response has been deliberate and measured, grounded in principle. Recognition of facts, understanding of consequences, and respect for sovereignty are essential for coexistence. This is not a threat, it is truth. And truth must be acknowledged. A deep silence followed. It was not uncomfortable. It was the weight of acknowledgement. The council had been forced to face the undeniable reality that humans acted with discipline, clarity, and principle. They could no longer dismiss Earth or its people as inconsequential. Humanity's presence had been recognized, not by intimidation, but by reason and steadfast adherence to principle. When the diplomat finally left the chamber, he walked slowly, allowing himself a moment of reflection. The past days had been exhausting, yet every moment had been necessary. The Empire had been challenged, confronted, and guided toward understanding. Allies and representatives from other species had observed and absorbed the same lessons. The ripple of recognition extended beyond. The council itself. He paused at the observation window, staring out at the infinite stretch of stars. The galaxy was vast, full of complex politics, powerful fleets, and centuries of history. Yet today, humanity had secured a place not through aggression, but through clarity, courage, and unwavering commitment to principle. The diplomat allowed himself a small, quiet satisfaction. The journey had been long, the challenges significant, but the impact was undeniable. In the coming days, he knew the Empire would adjust its policies, reconsider fleet movements, and communicate more cautiously. Other species would observe and learn. The human voice, steady and principled, had made its mark. Part 6, the final stage of this confrontation, had succeeded not through threats or fear, but through reason, patience, and the undeniable strength of truth. As he prepared for the journey back to Earth, the diplomat reflected on the lessons learned. The galaxy was vast and unpredictable, but clarity, principle, and persistence could shape understanding even in the most powerful civilizations. Humanity had demonstrated that respect, accountability, and preparation could achieve results far beyond the reach of force alone. The stars outside the station twinkled silently, as if acknowledging the presence of a species that had refused to be overlooked. Humanity's place in the galaxy was no longer theoretical. It was established, respected, and undeniable. The diplomat allowed himself one last glance at the expanse of space, knowing that the future of human diplomacy and the protection of their world had been secured through courage, clarity, and unyielding principle. The journey home would be long, but the message had been delivered, and it would resonate far beyond the corridors of the Galactic Empire. Humanity had spoken. The galaxy had listened, and the diplomat knew, with quiet certainty, that this was only the beginning of a presence that would not be ignored. Part 6 was complete. The story had reached its conclusion, not with conflict, but with understanding, respect, and the establishment of humanity as a deliberate and principled force in a galaxy full of power and uncertainty.